So, welcome to Ordinary Visionaries. And Morton, you have been a client and a colleague for a number of years. You've done my courses, and I get your newsletter. And I just read your last newsletter, and I won't get into the topic right now, but I
Mm,
just love your newsletter. You
thank you.
talk in such a realistic, human kind of way about your topic, which we'll
Mm,
get into. And if
mm,
you're listening to this, go to his website. The link is below and subscribe to the newsletter. If
yeah.
anybody in a small business, it'll be valuable, as we'll see. So tell me, Morton, how are you an ordinary visionary?
Thank you for the invitation, Robert. I'm really touched that you've invited me to be here. Um, I'm an ordinary visionary because, in actual fact, before doing this interview, I was thinking to myself, what is an ordinary visionary? And then I realized that my life is about having a dream, having a vision of the way I want to live. And I'm not a superstar, an A-list celebrity. I'm an ordinary man living a regular life. But with that, I have a vision for my life. With that, I have a vision for how I want to be. And with that, I have a vision for how the values and I think the trail I want to leave for those that's coming after me. So that's how I'm an ordinary visionary. I'm an ordinary everyday man who has a vision for how he wants to live his life. That's how I'm an ordinary visionary.
Yeah, well, that's the perfect definition.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your life and about your business. I don't know a lot about your backstory. You live in London, right?
I do.
London, England.
Yeah, I do.
So
My backstory is mixed, I'll say, if you want me to say. Um,
sure.
I'm going to say that during my 20s, I really was at a loss as to what I wanted to do, but knew that I wanted to make something of my life. And I studied. And then after finishing study, I went to work at Ernst & Young in their IT department. And in there, moved into consulting. But even though I enjoyed the position of working in the IT department, there was something missing. I felt there was something missing and I wanted to do more. I don't know what it was. But anyway, a quick backstory just to say, how did I get to the stage right now of creating Morton Patterson Consulting? Is one day I woke up and I thought to myself, there's more to me than this. And I've always loved reading. I'm a voracious reader. And I was visiting some cousins in America, and I was listening to an audiobook. I thought, I really like this. So I started listening to audiobooks, and then I had an idea, which was that I wanted to create audiobooks of Black American authors, but essentially Maya Angelou, Sidney Poitier, all of their books. So for some unknown reason, when I went back to London, I went to a shop which actually at the time was in the center of London selling audiobooks. I said to them, is there a market for Black audio writers and audiobooks available? She said, yes, massive. I left the shop so elated and excited about the prospect of doing it. And shortly after, I resigned from my job. And that was the biggest risk I've ever taken because I left a
No.
very secure position to do this, which I felt had tremendous potential. There's one thing though. I didn't actually know how to build and run a business. I just had heart. And it took me
Yeah.
years to learn after losing substantial amounts of money that the heart and the idea is not enough. You need the people, you need the processes, you need the systems, and you need someone that can help you to work together. You can't do it on your own. So my backstory is that having worked at Ernst & Young, having studied, I started that business, it failed, and I had to start all over again. I mean, it drove me almost, I'm going to say, to ruin. And
Wow.
purely by accident, I went
That's not
into,
unusual, by the way.
no, it's not.
Successful people, successful people usually have had a big issue or failure before they succeeded.
Absolutely. Let me tell you, I've had my fair share of them. So I have a degree of sympathy and empathy. I think you one of the interviews you've done on empathy, kindness, and gratitude. I have a degree of empathy for business owners when I meet them. So I started again, and I went into learning about personal development, and learned and did some NLP. And why I'm doing this today, I was sharing this story the other day. Why I'm doing this today is I did an NLP course, and I did it twice. Once as a participant and the other one as a volunteer. And sometimes people make statements that leaves you and has a tremendous mark on you. And one of the participants, as she was leaving, she turned to me and she said, "You have a way with people." And she was gone. And her purpose in my life was to tell me that. You have a way with people. And so when I told my colleagues who were the other volunteers, they said, "You too." Therefore, I started to do and learn more about this personal development work, started to get coaching, because I realized that there was a lot of stuff that was stopping me from believing what was possible. And through that, I ended up going back into working full time and actually working and training in business. And then I became a business advisor for some of the leading companies here. And while doing that, I was still reading. I recognized that there was one key problem that I had, that I suffered from, which was that I didn't like talking about money and I didn't like asking for money. So I had a problem with fees, and I would do it for free and stuff. And there's one particular moment I went to see a client, and she's loving the work, loving exactly what I'm doing, the quotation and the discussion. She says, "Morton, how much is this going to cost?" She's so frustrated. It's like, how much is this going to cost me? And even then I struggled to say. And I had to go away and get some
I
coaching
want to
on.
pay you. And you go, I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had to do a lot of work on that. And that is what created me doing Morton Patterson Consulting and creating my value program, because in the work I was doing, I realized that there were a lot of other people who were going through the same experience. Very talented, very capable, but unable to have that money conversation, unable to really charge the right fee. But actually, it was deeper than that. It was about valuing themselves, because it isn't just about money.
Yeah.
So I left that job, started the business, and started Morton Patterson Consulting. And that is what I'm doing now. I'm writing, as you know, I have a newsletter, Robert, called The Business of Value. And my work now is delivering workshops. Today, I've just returned home from working in an organization about how to do value-based selling. They are realtors, a realtor company. We call it sales. We call them estate agents. They're realtors. And I was going through, how do we sell value to our clients? How do you communicate that more effectively? So that's
So,
a
Morton,
short answer.
I'd like to know some of the principles that you teach. You talk about these things. What I like about your newsletter, it's not just principles; it's usually stories. I met with a client. They were dealing with this. They had this issue, this problem, this belief, this barrier that's very common. And we looked at it this way, and then we turned it around, and and all of a sudden, they were charging twice as much and getting no pushback. Things like that. Just great stories. And it's such a key issue for small businesses. I definitely had it.
Yeah.
And so my first question about it is, what is sort of the key internal issue you see about people not feeling they can charge what they're worth, or not knowing their value?
The key issue is actually something that I learned from you years ago, Robert, which was around
Really?
beliefs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's around beliefs. And the key issues, self-esteem and thinking that you are good enough. Today, at the clients, we were talking about how can they get the team to sell more effectively. And I said to them, which is what I write about a lot, is that I can come in here and take you through my framework, which is called the value framework. But unless you believe that it is possible, unless you have a sense of worthiness inside of you, this will not work. So you nod and you say, "Oh my gosh, Morton, that's fantastic. I love what you're saying." And you'll be all enthusiastic until I leave. And then you'll do exactly what you were doing before. So one of the key things is how you believe, what you believe, your sense of self-esteem and sense of worthiness. So when I write stories, and just talking about the stories, I over the years before I started writing, I'll be really clear here. One of the things I hated was when I'd read articles and they'd outline something. I wouldn't know what to do. There'd be no relation with the piece. It'd be really kind of stoic. And I wanted to write something that related to what I knew would relate to the readers themselves. So I would take a story from a particular client, just like today, struggling sales team. He didn't have any confidence. He doesn't have much self-belief. How could we work together and what could I take him through? And we went through how can you craft it and what you needed to say. So I like to write a story using an existing business person or business group as an example so that it can be related to. But one of the key things I said to them is you need to be clear on who you're writing for. And this is standard stuff. But also, it's your psychology. It's your psychology. And so those are two of the important things that in actual fact we started with today. Talking about their psychology, what's in the way, actually something you talk about, is it true that you can't charge more? And that kind of stuff, and really pushing back on that kind of belief.
Yeah. Well, when you start to explore that, you can go deeper because you can have the belief I can't charge more,
Yeah.
but and is that true? Well, not necessarily. A lot of other people charge more, or why do I charge the smaller amount? But underneath that, there's often a belief like I'm not worth it,
Yeah.
or
No one
why
will
would
pay me
they?
that money.
No
Yeah.
one will pay me that money, or why should they
Yeah.
trust me? Or
Yeah.
often the core disempowering belief has to do with our self-worth. Like
Yeah.
I'm not good enough. You know, later on, 20 years from now, when I'm really an expert, then I can charge more. It's based on what, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe there's
But
some truth to that. I mean, if you're more experienced and et cetera, you are worth more. But it's sort of um, I'm, and it's an interesting thing that you use the words. It's like, what is something worth? What is a service worth? But I'm not worthy
yeah.
is such, where have you investigated with clients where that comes from? Usually it's messages from our childhood and
Oh,
stuff like that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Robert, I'm doing this work because I struggled with it. And that's me being
Right.
really clear and honest. Yeah. I
Yeah.
grew up not thinking that I was clever enough. I grew up thinking that I wasn't good enough. And I had to look into that stuff. So quite often, as you say, it's something related to your childhood that, your experiences that makes anybody feel that they don't have the confidence, or they're not able to complete it, or they're not able to start it, or there is some reason that keeps them stuck. And the interesting thing is that it isn't about pricing. It is about belief. It is about you. You can see someone that's not really the best consultant that has the courage to ask for the most exorbitant fee just because of how they think. And then you have someone who's really competent, and just because of how they think, they won't even dare ask for anything more. So it isn't about pricing. It's really about two things in my mind. One, it's your self-confidence. But the crux of my work, which is the business of value work, is not about how much you charge. It's really about the value of what you have done. How much of a change that you have provided for your client. And many independent professionals that I've worked with, even the company I was working with today, they don't think about the value of what they're providing. We're all focused on the work we're going to do. Okay, this is my framework. This is how long it's going to take. This is what we're going to do, and this is when we're going to finish. And the client isn't interested in that. So I created something that gets the professional to focus on how the client will be at the end. Get that client to discuss what a fantastic future looks like. And then the resistance is no longer there. They don't care how much it's going to cost because you've engaged them at a deeper emotional level. So knowing your value isn't really about knowing your price. It's about knowing the difference that you made. So I'll read one of your newsletters of old, Robert. Yeah. And the value of it is I'd read it. And as a consequence of reading, I'll go and do something. Actually, can I share a story?
Yeah.
Serious story. You wrote something years ago about outcomes. Okay. And I was doing some marketing and I wrote to an old client and I said, let's have a coffee. And he said, yes, looking forward to it. And just before I went to that meeting, I read one of your newsletters. And it said, don't go in there rushing, talking about yourself. Ask them questions, right? Just before I had that meeting, I read that piece. The value of that piece was that it changed my approach. So I got in there and I sat down and we were talking about him, his family. And he turned to me and he said, are you still consulting? I said, yeah. He says, I've got this problem. Can you still help me? I said, yeah. And that's because I spent all of my time asking him, learning about him, just asking questions. But the value you had provided was what I was able to do. And this is what I help clients to think about. Not how much you're going to charge, but what can a client do as a consequence of working with me or working with you? What I could do as a consequence of reading your thing was, right, this is the approach I'm going to do. And you wouldn't even have known that because you've written and you're off doing something else, preparing
Right.
your next newsletter. Yeah, but that was a value.
It's really interesting in my interviews. Many of the people I'm interviewing are on my email list and they've been clients. And I keep getting the feedback of the difference it made to them. But it's interesting. This whole thing of I'm not trying to sell something. I'm seeing if I can provide value. But the only way I can start with that is to understand where they are now.
Yeah.
What's working and not working for them, where they want to go, and see a possibility. And when I see that possibility and they see the possibility, that can be worth a lot. If you, yeah, I mean, just the transformation that happened in your business out of partly because of the things you learned from me, that's worth a heck of a lot more than whatever you paid for my services, right? And that's what we often
absolutely.
And that's what we often forget. We don't look at the big picture down the road. If I help someone increase their income by 10% over 10 years, it could be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And sometimes people have bigger breakthroughs than that.
Yeah.
So this thing of really understanding and helping them understand the future value, because if you understand it, it's one thing. But it's pulling it out of people and saying, tell me what you want.
Yeah.
Where are you
having
now?
The confidence.
What don't you have? Yes.
Yeah. It's having the confidence to have that conversation as well. To ask those questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
So it's such an interesting dynamic because we often think of confidence as, well, it's bravado and I think I'm worth a lot. And I never really thought that way. I always thought when I met with somebody, I was never trying to sell them. I was trying to see if there was a fit here. I do this. I help people get more clients. I don't know if I can help you or not. What are you going through? Just what you experienced when you met with that person. And then people then start to feel they like you and trust you, not because you're trying to convince them, because you're listening. You're really interested, right?
Yeah. And you're on their side. And you've had, if you were just saying, I wrote a piece quite a while ago called Long After You're Gone. Okay? It's just a title I liked, right?
Yeah.
So I would work with a client and I would say, I think this is the way you should approach this conversation. And let's see how it would work for you. And we'd practice it. long after we finished our work. My value is in them using it for a year, and they've toned it, improved it. 2 years later, they're using, and they're much more proficient long after they've finished the intervention with me. And that's value. It's understanding that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's really key. That's what I think.
I want to talk a little bit more about this. The the belief that I'm not worthy. It's such an interesting thing that and I taught people the Byron Katie process. It's funny, in the last interview I just did a couple of days ago, we had the same conversation, and it's questioning your beliefs. And
Yeah, she's great.
it's almost like a belief is encased in our mind, covered by an ironclad shell, welded in there, and it's just so firm. And until that shifts or cracks,
Yeah,
you're always going to come out of that belief. Oh, it's like
yeah,
I'm not really worth it. And then you start asking, is that really true?
yeah,
Well, yeah, it's
yeah,
true. Well, let's keep looking. Is it really, really true that you're a worthless piece of shit
yeah. It's true.
or whatever?
Oh,
Well,
whatever.
maybe
It's true.
not. And then you start to have a crack in that belief,
Yeah,
and then
and that can take ages.
yeah. Or it
That
can also happen.
crack.
It can happen in an instant. When you have
Yes.
a recognition. That happened to me several times when I did the work.
Mm.
I read that book by Byron Katie, Loving What
Mm.
Is, and I spent a lot of time writing down my beliefs and questioning
Mm.
everything. It's like everything
Mm.
until it was like, oh, I'm in a trance
Yeah,
of self-belief that is really unsubstantial, but it's just thoughts.
yeah. And it takes. I was speaking to someone last week, and I was saying, "What do you want?" He said, "I've spent so much time involved in my work. It's almost like I have to rediscover me. I have to rediscover what I want." And so our lives can engulf us so much that what our dreams are, aspirations are, slowly gets buried behind responsibilities, duties, everyday stuff. So you and what you desire isn't at the forefront. And when someone asks you, you can't answer that question very clearly. And so that's where the disbelief comes, because then it's shrouded by so many things. And I
Yeah.
think, like you, probably like me as well, Robert, the problem was that through the gift of the first journey with my NLP program, where I had that, and I remember Ian turning to me and saying, "Morton, you got stuff with your beliefs." Didn't have a clue what that's about, but I was hearing what I was saying, and I couldn't believe what I was saying. But that's because it was so deeply embedded in me. And my work came about because one day, I'll share a story with you. It was Christmas. One day, I was driving to a client, and I was angry with myself because they had already paid me, but it wasn't enough. But I was turning up and doing the work, but it wasn't. It's like, why do you keep doing this to yourself? But you're
Right.
unable to break free of the walls, as you said, that you've created for yourself. And I specifically remember that incident. I remember where I was. I remember when I was driving, and I was angry with me and not understanding what was going on. So, and that's what I help people with, getting clear about that stuff. And I have a bagload of I have a bag of those stories in some way, shape, or other. I would write about them when they come up in my mind, as a way of guiding people to identify.
Yeah. Yeah, stories are really useful. We often basic concepts just don't connect because they're not
Yeah,
emotional.
yeah,
And when you tell a story about a client that was stuck in this way and did this and that, you go, "Oh, that's me. That's where
yeah,
I'm stuck. I can relate to
Yeah.
that. I'm just like that person. Oh, I'm thinking those thoughts like that person.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
Exactly.
those thoughts are also BS. What's
Yeah.
possible for
Exactly.
me?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
we start to come out of our shell. My
Yeah.
teacher Salvador Poe says, "Come into the sunlight, not into the darkness of your limitations. It's like come out into the sunlight and
Yeah.
just, hey, what's possible? What do I
Yeah.
want? How can I help?"
That's a different
And
world.
and then I'm not coming from this fear of, are they going to accept me? Are they going to like me? And just being present with people. I
And that can be a lifetime of journey of understanding, accepting, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
It can be a lifetime journey. Um, I would share, I think it took me a long time to realize I think I was born to some extent to do what I'm doing, but didn't realize I was born to do it because it took me quite a while to get clear in it. So, and I also realized the power of stories. Okay. And it was my role to convey to people so that they could relate to it. Because I remember doing a mastermind program and, um, and then I did a teleseminar through learning about your teleseminars. It's way back. And a woman gave me the feedback and she says, Morton, you're all up here. You're talking about it because you understand it. And us who are on the phone, we don't understand it the way you do. So I recognized that a story had to illustrate it better because they could, as you're just saying, and I'm saying, I could relate to it. So, can I share another story?
Please. We love
Oh,
stories.
okay. This is about this. The moral of this story is about taking your time to ask the client the questions, the right questions. So, I'm no gardener, okay, and I had a beautiful garden, but there was so much shrubs there. So I looked at the paper and I got somebody to come around and look at the work that needed to be done. I didn't want to do it. So he came in and he spent all of 10 minutes looking around. He looked around, says, oh, yeah, we can do this, right? Now I had a budget in my mind. So he looked around and he says, oh, yeah, when do you need it done and when can we start? I said, I'd like you to start. It was in the month of April. I'd like you to start this weekend and I'll get it done as quickly as possible. The price, I think, at the time was about £150, quite a few years ago, £150 to do my garden. And my study overlooked my garden. They came on the Saturday morning as expected, and they were busy chopping and cutting and weeding. And he brought a colleague, and his colleague said to him, because they realized it was more than they expected, the work. His colleague said to him, how much did you charge for this? He told him the price, and his colleague started swearing. I'm overlooking them in my garden, and I could see them, and they were,
Oh, they
at
didn't know
that
you were
time, they're
looking.
managing. Yeah. But if they did, the point is, realize that they'd undercharged. Anyway, they did the job. Fantastic. I loved it. And they left. I learned a valuable lesson for myself and for my clients. If he had stopped to say to me, why do you want to do this? What will it give you? What is your budget? Doesn't mean I would have paid 3 times as much. The value to me, which is around knowing it, the value to me was I wanted to come home and sit in my garden and drink a glass of wine at the end of the day. That's what I was paying for.
Yeah.
But he didn't have the skills to ask those kind of questions. He didn't have the skills to understand. That's what it was worth to me. And that's what many of us do as independent professionals. We do not engage the client at such a place till we understand what is the deeper reason for buying this service. And therefore, the price becomes inconsequential, I suppose.
Right. A concept, I love this conversation because it's all about, um, that interface between you and the client and deciding where you're going to go and what you're going to do. And I talk about
Mm,
this concept of ultimately, you're not selling a service.
No.
What you're doing is you're selling the future.
Yes.
And so the future is that vision of what you want.
Yeah.
And because people don't want the service.
No.
If they didn't need the service, they could just get the result and snap your fingers. They
Absolutely.
don't. Let me tell you all about this service and all this stuff we do. Well, who
Yeah.
cares? The
Nobody
question
does.
is what is the future you want? If you look, so
Yeah.
you can say it depends on what you're offering, but imagine yourself a year from now, and your business is, and your marketing and your ability to price is at a whole different place. What would things be like that you just can't
Yeah.
seem to have right now?
Yeah.
And then tell me more about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until that they can start to taste the future.
Yeah.
And then you have to
Absolutely.
ask yourself as the service provider, honestly, can I help them provide that or not? Because if they
Yeah.
say, I want to live in a gilded mansion in an island of my own, I'm going to say, I don't know if I can do that for you. You know, that's a fantasy. I'm
I'm not your
exaggerating a
guy.
bit.
Yeah.
I want to be
Yeah. I'm
making
not
$1
your guy.
billion a year. Can you help me? No, I don't think so.
I'm not your
But I
guy.
would like
Yeah.
to be in a place financially where I'm converting a larger percent of people into clients. I'm doing bigger projects. I'm really doing the work
Yeah.
I love.
Yeah.
And I'd say, yeah, well, that's great. I can help you with that. Tell me a little bit about what's in the way, and let's see
Yeah.
where that is. And now I'm a partner with them in their vision, and then I'm committed to that vision. But
Yeah.
the great thing I like about your story, that goes right down to um, a handyman helping you with your garden or your house or whatever. And if they
Yep.
can, I would love someone that's a handyman. I've hired a few handyman. I've had my ins and outs. Where if they could only say to me, what would you like the condition of your house to be so you really felt good about it all the time? Well, I'd like this and this and this. Well, tell me more about that. What's possible for
Yeah.
you? Because, I still have a budget. But it's a bigger sort of picture, and then people get excited about the future
Yeah.
if they can see a
Provided you
different
ask them the right
future, right?
questions. Yeah. Yeah. Provided you ask the right questions.
And they're kind
Yeah.
of unhappy about their current situation, and the
Their
future
present.
that they see is not very bright.
Yeah.
And you're just
Which
there
is why
to,
they've come to you in the first place.
yeah,
Which is why they've come to you in the first place. Yeah.
yeah, I'm stuck. Things aren't
Yeah.
working. I don't know how to do this. I feel I've hit a dead end. And you're there to open things up for them. And that's why most of the people that I talked to ended up working with me, because I was just open the space for what's possible. And I knew what I could do and what I couldn't do.
I think it was, if I may say, it was more than that. Your consistency and your manner of communicating was quite open, considerate, and empathic. So over time, I know I was reading your stuff for years. I say, I like what he writes, So you get a sense of the person, So when you finally speak to Robert, and I remember you were honest in what you were doing. I remember actually years ago, I wrote to you and it says, I'm interested in doing this program. And you said, fill in this form. You came back, you says, Morton, you're not ready for this. So that degree of honesty compared to many other coaches would say, oh yeah, come along, it's going to cost. But they realize, they know the truth. So all of those things creates the frame.
I can't remember that, by the way. I've met with so many people.
I remember. I don't expect you to remember it, but it's the morals that you carried. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was so
Well,
important.
sometimes I literally want someone convince me that you're ready to work with me, and I'm not getting it. So, tell me, what do you want? Because ultimately, we have to remember that the client has to do the work. We can guide them. We can be a coach. We can be a support. We can hold the vision for them. But ultimately, I don't know. Tell me your experience of this. Maybe it hasn't happened with you, but I would sometimes work with a client that I saw had potential. We'd had the conversation. They said, "Yes, I want to work. I'll do the work," and they wouldn't do the frickin' work, or they would just keep getting stuck, and it was always the thing that wrenched me because I loved it when it said, "Hey, I did this and I see the
Mm.
possibility here and things are happening." And oh, it's like that we live for that,
I
right?
agree, but great point, and I want to share this with you. Um, I think when you have a client that you go through the original diagnostic with them, or use your service document and they've read it and they're saying all the right stuff, and they're not doing it, it's a perfect time to unpack from your place your perception of what's stopping them. And from my place is for me to say, I'm not sure if you're ready to do this right now. So I think it's a great opportunity to unpack their beliefs. You're saying you want this, but you're not. And my most recent experience of this was a client who I worked with before, and highly productive, and came back to me after we finished working about a year later and said she was ready to do some stuff. So I sat down with her and we were having a coffee, talking about what it is she wants to do. And she said to me, "This is what I want to do, and this is what I do." Something inside of me said, "You're not ready." And I said to her, "I don't think we could work together right now. I think that you still need to unpack some stuff that's going on in your life before you're ready to make this commitment." She went away and she came back about 7 months later and she says, "Morton, I remember you saying to me I wasn't ready. And I wasn't. Now I am." And she was ready to do the work. So, yes, I've met them and I think it's an ideal opportunity to challenge their beliefs about this is what I want, but I'm doing everything in my power to prevent myself from achieving it.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Oh yeah. I mean, the only thing that's really stopping us is ourselves.
Yeah.
And but when we break it down, who is ourself? Ourself in that context are our beliefs and our
Yeah.
attitudes and the way we
Yeah.
come at life, right?
Yeah.
And if that is so mixed up or clouded or conflicted, we're going to have a problem. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes it's kind of funny because if you have a client like that, well, you're going to work more with them. You're going to make more money because they need more help. So that's one way to look at it. But,
It
uh,
depends on your philosophy.
well, but some people are so ready to
Mm.
learn and take it on and implement, and they make really rapid progress.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. 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 Um, 2 years ago, I had a client who came to me through LinkedIn. She'd been following me, and she got in touch with me. We did a diagnostics, and we sat down together. And she decided to work with me. And at that time, I think emotionally, mentally, she wasn't in a great place. Anyway, she wasn't in a great place, but she knew she had to do something, and decided to go ahead anyway. 12 months later, I said to her, "My God, look at the progress you've made." I said to her, "I need to ask you something. What made you go ahead? Because you weren't in the best place at that time." She says, "I know, but I knew I had to do something. And I just knew I had to do something. Otherwise, I wouldn't move from where that stuckness that I was in. So I commended her for her bravery of acknowledging where she was and pushing forward anyway. I mean, she's flying, absolutely flying now. But, that's another example of a client who are facing challenges, and the challenges can be reasons enough for you not to do it because you think, I need to sort this out and I need to sort that out first before I make this investment. But she was brave enough to decide and wise enough to decide, right, I need to move ahead with this. And it was a good decision.
Morton, what are some maybe another story or two of a client that really struggled with owning their value?
Uh,
Maybe you talked about setting fees and whatever. Okay, I'm going to charge X, but when we came to charging X, they couldn't even get it out of their mouth. Yeah, things like that,
I think
where they.
I think what it is, what I have learned, I'm going to share a story with one client, is that they're so caught up in um, what they need to do as opposed to recognizing the difference that they make. So, this particular organization I was working with, 25 employees, been running the business about 12 years, very experienced business owner, but was caught up in being grateful for the contracts that they received and therefore wasn't taking the time out to separate the factors that we're actually undercharging because everything is combined together. Okay. So we started to work together and I said to her, let's assess what you're doing in relation to who you're doing it for and how long it takes. And we spent, I mean, it's like we spent a good couple of hours working through it step by step, looking at every single task that they were doing, how long it took, and how much it was costing. And she realized how much she was losing out on money. That alone, that awareness gave her the courage to say, wow, now I know that I need to go back and talk to them. And the next thing we did was we looked at how can you phrase this? So maybe with existing clients, we're going to say there's just going to be an incremental increase, just this one. But with future clients, we know this is where you're going to be. But the most important thing that came out of that experience with her was they worked with young women who had gone through some pretty terrible experiences.
Hmm.
But what they did was they provided a safe place for them to be. So the buyer, so to speak, recognized that when their clients went there, that environment was the right environment and they didn't have to worry about it anymore. So her perception of her value first was, we just need to do this work and we just need to deliver it. But their real value was managing risk. And therefore, when they were able to be aware that we're managing the risk for our clients, so we know that once they go there, we don't need to worry about it. That was their value. So when they got that inside of them and they could see, we could break down exactly how long each thing took, what it was costing them. Confidence soared. The conversation, she phoned me, she said, you know what, Morton, I'm having the conversations and I'm saying, this is our fee. And I could never do that before, but this is our fee. And I'm confident in if they say no, that's okay, because I recognize the value that we're providing. So for me, the work I'm doing essentially is giving my clients the confidence to really understand the impact of their work. And then you have the confidence to ask for the fee that you feel is relating to it. So I never say, oh, you must charge the most exorbitant amount. It's not about that. Because it might be right for you. And someone else might say they're going to charge more. It is really, at the end of the day, you must be clear on the impact that you're making. And that is what the client is buying, as we spoke about the future. And the future can be termed as the difference that you are making with your intervention. And
Right.
that's I mean, it's one story, so many others.
Yeah. Well, there's another issue that's kind of in a different domain, and that's where I can't think of a specific example, but people are overcharging. They have, it's a very, very high fee for whatever
Yeah.
the service might be, and yet what they're delivering is not matching up to that fee that they're charging. In other words, they're greedy, and they're not. It seems to be more common to be undercharging, but overcharging can also be an issue because then, well, how was that company that did your lawn or fixed your house or whatever, did your therapy? I don't know. It can be anything. And are that might be an issue for people. It's like, well, if I charge more, will I be able to provide that service at a level? And then think, well, it has to be so much better. So finding the
Yeah.
right level, because if you're charging way too much and people aren't really feeling satisfied, it's going to hurt you in other ways.
In the long run, but I think, Robert, that's a double-edged sword,
Yeah.
and I mean it this way: value is what we attribute to it, which is why someone can go and pay £20,000 for a car, and for what that car's giving them, which might be overpriced for someone else that never pay more than £10,000 for a car. It's the same thing, gets you from A to B, but what they get from the car is different. So I say it's a double-edged sword because if we're talking about overcharging, we could talk about the people who are ripping clients off and not providing a service at all. That's immoral. That's wrong. That's dishonest.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the fact is, you charge a fee in my mind relative to what it means to the client and what they're prepared to pay, unless you're doing something dishonest. So it's Christian Dior, their bags, compared to the price of production, it's exorbitantly high. But whatever it gives to people,
Yes.
yeah, they're going to buy it.
Well, that's an
And it's a
interesting
matter of perception.
conversation because I have this whole thing about luxury goods. I feel it's all kind of smoke and mirrors. But, I'm not in the category of person that really loves luxury. I just, but you have a millionaire mindset and the guy's a multimillionaire and he's not going to buy his wife a $20 purse or even a $50 purse, even $150, not even a $500 purse. If it's not $5,000, it's just is worthless. It's a funny kind of thing. So you buy a Hermes purse or whatever the hell
Yeah.
I don't even know all these brands. But some of these women's purses they're beautifully designed, and they feel
it's the
the value is there, but they're living it.
Yeah.
Where, people live on different levels of income and stuff. It's like, come to my little shabby house and it's a 50,000 square foot mansion with 20 servants. It's like, it's nothing for, whatever. This whole perception of value of it's how you're brought up and what social class you're in. And often there's a ceiling. My father was a military man. He was an Air Force career officer. And we had 5 kids and we had enough, but we didn't ever have a lot. We never felt we were poor. We were up middle class. But to see, higher level, it's I don't know if you have that.
I think that's where, totally get it. I think that is where beliefs come from, because you have a different perception of what things are worth. I'm no millionaire, but let me share another story with you. I've just come back from Spain on a trip. I went with my friends, and we ate out at different places, and then we went to a particular place in Alicante called the Nautilus. Lovely restaurant. And my friend turned to me and he said, Morton likes this kind of fancy place, but I like it. And sometimes we can't excuse it's not exorbitantly high, but the quality of the food, the ambiance and everything was different to some of the places that we visited. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It's relative to the beholder. And I'm very comfortable in going there and paying just a little bit more for that little bit more of service. And it's the same thing with my work in terms of I might meet a client and I I would read about stories of what some of the coaches are doing, all of this, download it, teach yourself, and then they're going to charge them 10, 15,000 pounds. That to me is unethical for me. So for me, I want to deliver a service of quality. And part of that quality is the engagement that I provide. Part of that quality is the questions I'm going to ask you. Part of that quality is you feeling that I get you and I'm interested in you. And so I'm going to charge you more for that feeling because it's meeting what I think you need, as opposed to something exorbitant just because I know that you can afford it, or whether you can't afford it or not, it's just because it's what I want to charge. And that's a different thing, so, but the perception of value is relative.
Yeah. A number of years ago, I was doing a 1-year program, and I was charging quite a lot per month.
Mm.
And when people are paying more, they have more skin in the game, and they're more likely to implement, because it's like, if I'm paying this person X dollars a month, I'd better get my money's worth, and the only way I can do that is to implement and do the exercises. Otherwise, I'm ripping
Absolutely.
myself off. And so finding
Absolutely.
that pricing thing that will put enough pressure on them to take it seriously. So if I charge
Yeah.
25% of that, well, it's X dollars a month.
Mm.
It's like, well, if I don't do anything, it's only that. It's not a big deal. So there's that whole dynamic of what's the amount that you need to charge for the client to take themselves seriously and take the work seriously. And that can sort of go through the stratosphere. They say, well, Robert, our service is only $25,000 a month. I can't imagine anyone charging that but there are coaches that it's like, well, on our lower tier of 25,000 a month, what's your higher tier? Oh, we can't even talk about that with you. It's 150,000 a month. And if you're a multimillionaire, you might go, well, yeah, I want that one. Well, what do you really get extra for that? And it's like, if they're paying a lower fee, they wouldn't take it seriously, depending on what their income bracket is. So you've got to have a sense. And it's not about manipulating things, but if you're not charging what they feel is a bit of a stretch, they're simply not going to take it seriously. There's so many interesting dynamics in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
So, by the way,
I had a situation.
I figured it out, Morton. I'm gonna offer a service at $1 million a month. All I need is one client a year, and I'm all set.
Yeah, and there might be someone who might be happy to pay that. You never know. But I think the thing is that here's one of the lessons I learned with the Know Your Value stuff. And I talk about this and I write about this. It's being caught up in the trap that you have to, and you talk about this also, you have to quote a single fee. Okay? So I had a client the other day and I'm upgrading them. I'm going to put a provision forward. And I was thinking of just one fee. Or I'm just going to increase the fee by this amount. And I was talking to my wife and she says, Morton, why don't you do what you normally do? Offer them options. And so you can charge that much more with the value increased, but it takes time for you to work out what that value is. For example, today when I was working with the client, we were talking about creating some options. And I said, I need you to go away and make a list of what the premium service would look like. And then we could work out the fees relative to it. So the point I'm making is that quite often we're caught up in just one fee that you need to choose, one fee that you need to present. And in actual fact, what you need to do is what the airlines do. Do you want to turn right or do you want to turn left? And maybe if you turn right, just turn right a little bit as opposed to turning right a lot. And in each section, there are different options. And this is what I advise clients to do. Never think about it being a yes or a no. It's like, what are the things that you could bundle in there? And that makes that decision. If you decide to charge more, that makes that decision by the client much easier.
Yeah.
So that's something that I always advocate.
That was something that I learned from Alan Weiss. He
Yeah,
said, don't have it a yes or no, have a choice of yeses.
yeah,
This,
yeah. I
this,
like
or
how that's work.
this.
Mm,
Yeah. I'm going to be interviewing him
yeah.
in a month or two, so I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
Yep.
That's,
That guy is brilliant. But a choice
yeah,
of
that's interesting.
yeses as opposed to
Yeah,
yes or no.
yeah,
And then it's like,
absolutely.
okay, well, what works for me? And then you find something. So, Morton, we covered a lot of interesting things from a lot of different angles
Mm,
here, and I
mm.
appreciate your stories and your perspective. And so let's summarize this. If there was one big concept that people have to get to know their value so that they're charging what they're worth, anything that we haven't said?
Um, that's a very good question. And I think what comes up for me is don't make the decision for the client, because that can be the biggest thing in the way. Oh, I've seen their accounts. I know how much money they have. They can't afford it. So you modify your offer because of what you think they can afford. That is not your job. Your job is to
No.
understand them as much as possible, and present the options for them to make a decision. It's not your business to decide for them. And so be really, really clear on how much of an impact, the difference that you could make, and give them the space to make the decision for themselves. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
I mean,
That
I
that
would,
that's really true because you
yeah,
really don't
yeah.
know their financial situation, how much they have in savings. I worked with clients that, I just inherited a lot of money from my uncle, so I can afford this. I mean, how do you know that, right?
He did not.
And with that, I just want to thank you for taking the time to do this interview. It's really an interesting and powerful and important topic for us to consider. What are we worth? What's our value? How do we offer services where we find that connection and see the future for that client? And all of these things are all interestingly, dynamically connected.